Hi, Seth Kahn here with the podcast on Grand Challenges, and today I am super pleased to be joined by Robert Jeraj, who is the professor of medical physics and human oncology at the University of Wisconsin. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Seth. It's my pleasure to be a guest in your podcast. Looking forward to it.
And I was recently your guest at the University of Wisconsin. Last December, Robert set up about 20 different interviews for me with staff at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in their medical physics department, the premier medical physics department in the country. So, Robert, thank you for arranging that. I have a little bit of an education now, but I want to share that education with my listeners. So let's start off on kind of the foundation. What is medical physics? Tell us a little bit about this field.
Medical physics is a subdiscipline of physics that most of the people never hear about. But interestingly, many people get faced with medical physics without even knowing they face it. And the reason is because a lot of medicine is permeated by the impact of medical physics. For example, when you go to diagnostic procedure, when you get a scan, most of the developments in, say, CT scanning has been done by medical physics. To go for therapy, say radiotherapy, most of the developments in radiotherapy technology has been done by medical physics. So, and as we know, this is like procedures that are done daily. We all face them multiple times. And if there's no medical physics, we wouldn't have been where we are today. But it is medical physics is always kind of like sitting in the background, often invisible. You know, when patients come to the doctor, they see doctors, but they don't see the disciplines that are actually contributing to mostly what is quantitative science when they measure things. So if you remember when going to the doctor in the past, it was like they looked at you, they lifted your hand, measured something on your hand and said, oh, I know something is not going well. Now we have very precise technologies that can assess the state of where we are, where we measure, and we can also model the disease and then make predictions. And this is what the physics is. So physics is a quantitative science, and in this case applied to human and human disease. So that's essentially the gist of medical physics.
And tell us about your own background in medical physics. What are the areas that you in particular are interested in?
So I'm in my deep heart a modeler. I like to understand the world. I like to model the world. This is like the property of the physics. But I do realize that the models are only as good as the data that comes in. And here comes to mind a quote from Victor Weizsäcker, who was a well-known Austrian nuclear physicist. And that he said was that the models are only as good as the Austro-Hungarian train timetables. And he said the trains were never on time, but at least you knew how late they were, which means we don't have a precise knowledge about the humans, about the disease, but at least with our models, we know how far we are from the reality. And of course, the more data we can capture, the more precise the data we can capture, the better we can assess the state of the disease and better we can crack the treatments that can then help to treat this disease. So, but in practice, I'm mostly involved with what's called molecular imaging, which is the way how we can measure molecular processes in the body through advanced imaging. One of those most commonly used modalities is positron emission tomography. And this is another very fantastic aspect of what physics brings to medicine. A lot of people don't even think that there is something like antimatter. Now, in positron emission tomography, or PET, we're actually injecting antimatter into humans with antimatter labeled particles that are like showing functional and molecular processes that then can image distribution of these processes in the body. And that's what we use to explore, for example, in disease, if those processes have been changed, have been stalled, have been dead, what's the spatial distribution, temporal distribution, and based on that, make predictive models. And then we make models of how we can modify, like treat, in other words, to have like most success that we can hope for. So this is really the essence of what we do.
Thank you. And Pat is an excellent example. I think a lot of my listeners will have heard of the modeling that was done around the COVID-19 virus vaccination, but that may be the limit of it. And we don't get much exposure to a lot of the other kind of modeling that's taking place. Tell us a little bit more about modeling and the state of the art in physics today, in medicine.
Well, yeah, modeling, I think, is very broad definition, especially in a way how we see how precisely and what we can model. We know that, at the end of the day, we would like to model every cell. We would like to model sub-processing the cell. We like to model interactions between the cells, how they interact, like the tissues, the whole systems. There is no way we can model at that level. So we always kept to compromise and make approximate models that are doable. And a lot of these models are relatively simple just because we don't have as much data that we can capture from the humans. If you look at how we can capture the data, we can scan somebody. So imaging is one of the ways we can look at body fluids like blood, urine, and see what's in there. And technologies are enabling now, or we can take sample from tissue. So these are basically the ways how we can assess the state. But if you take like a biopsy, you get it from one point. If you take from the blood, you get the integral, the average, what's circulating the body. If you image, you get its distribution, but you cannot interrogate to the, say, genomic lab. So all these things get us some information, but it's incomplete. It's an average, it's time average. We cannot do it all the time. With some variable devices, obviously we can get, but limited information now, even like constantly. So that's why this modeling is at this point is relatively crude. Every physician makes a model in their head, right? You come, they look at you, they think of you, they look at some of the tests, and they make a model of you, your disease, environment, and where you live. Because like when you make an optimal decision for somebody, it's not just the disease; it's also in the context where somebody lives. What are means that they have, environment, support infrastructure, etc. So anyway, these are very complex models. So what we try to do now is actually measure this and be more predictive. Now, obviously, the big elephant in the room these days is AI, and all the methodologies that are coming through big data that we have, with good and bad. And obviously, there is a lot of information, but a lot of information is not even properly structured, properly assessed, properly labeled, and also it's uncertain. So I think the AI will definitely, and it's already making important revolutionary changes in medicine as well. But of course, it requires understanding the AI models, understanding uncertainties, understanding when they're giving us wrong predictions, etc. So, and this is also where like medical physics is changing rapidly by adopting and also putting the science behind these models. So, again, like AI models are just another type of data-driven models that are there.
Yeah. Wow, there's so much going on in the field. I mean, as a layperson who reads about science, I'm aware of so many breakthroughs in physics and so many breakthroughs in medicine. It only makes sense that this would be a rapidly evolving field. This is a field that I think has not gotten the publicity that it deserves. Many people have not heard of medical physics, and yet it's on the cutting edge, and it's something, as you said, affects all of us. One of the other areas that you're involved in, and now I'm not talking about the domain of medical physics, but maybe the organization of medical, you're very involved internationally. You're actually speaking to me from Slovenia, where you got a degree, where you're from, and you're there not just for pleasure, but also for business, and you've been traveling around the world, and you're in contact with people in the field of medical physics all over the world. Paint a picture for us of what's taking place globally in medical physics.
So you're absolutely correct. I think most of medical physics did get recognition, but often indirectly. There have been Nobel Prizes given for invention of MRI, for example. However, the impact of this is usually hidden behind the scenes, correct, when you go to medicine. So if you look at it globally, the situation is very, very heterogeneous. You have places that are like very advanced in medical physics, often highly correlated with the means. So just like GDP, obviously people can afford expensive technologies, the cutting edge technologies. However, that itself is not guarantee that are like much better, that's much simpler, cheaper, and more affordable technologies. So often, just because you can buy doesn't mean that you're getting much more for the bank for the buck. So what we see around the world is really a lot of innovation that's not only driven by the available funding resources, but also just by ingenuity of people that they have to solve the problem in the middle of Africa. And and a lot of this is actually transferable. So for example, AI supported treatment planning for radiotherapy has actually started because of the resource needs in around the world, where they can don't have physicians or physicists that they can support this. However, it's equally or more important in the developed world, where there is enough of resources. Yet, then you can release those resources. They can do other things as well. So I think this international interlace is super important. And you everybody probably knows really important um, revolutionary discoveries that were enabled by international partnerships. Comes like hydrogen physics, Higgs boson that was discovered by investing billions of dollars and euros and yens and everything else into one infrastructure. But what's maybe less seen is that was really everyone from around the world, from all the countries around the world, large or small budgets, contributed by participating in this worldwide research. And of course, enable like technologies like World Wide Web, right? That we are now using and was facilitating this international collaboration. So medical physics is a little bit less interconnected. And part of this is because medical physics, the lab for medical physics is everyone's clinic, and realistically. So it's not one centralized resource where everybody would come, but it's every single, big or small, academic or non-academic, is the actually the place where the medical physics discoveries are happening in a small or a big way. But of course, it's good what you can do locally. And of course, there are local specifics, there are local finding environments, local opportunities. Yet, I think it's really key to bring together and leverage this global expertise and global diversity of expertise, which is impossible to have in a single country. So this maybe explains why I'm so excited about bringing the world together. This is, I think, why we talk a lot about together how we can make the world better for everyone by working together on the problems that are very common. We're all the same. We all like to laugh. Nobody wants to cry, correct? We're all identical.
So, and you're in Slovenia right now, which is one of the leaders in medical physics. Tell us a little bit about why Slovenia is a leader in medical physics, and then some of the other hotspots around the globe that you would say are important as we look at the evolution of the field.
Yeah. This is a kind of interesting aspect of it. Slovenia, many have not even heard about, or maybe it very tiny country in the central of Europe, 2 million people, didn't actually have medical physics organized in academic way until 20 years ago, way later than has in some other places, had medical physics in the clinical environment. However, I think part of that was related to the lessons learned, how to organize and structure a discipline that enabled to, and of course, like it's much easier in a small environment, correct? When you have, it's much more agile. You can adapt, you can adjust, and that's something that has built a really unique opportunity that you can do things that normally it's very hard to do. So I think making sure that we have a good pipeline of students that are coming in, and this is maybe one of the challenges because the typically most often I would say 90%. A medical physics is advanced degree. So typically people would study physics, and then do masters in medical physics, and then they go into clinical training for a clinical professional job as medical physicists working in hospitals and clinics. But there's also the academic part. And, this sometimes is disconnected. So it's really key to connect this because it is, if you think, people who want to study physics, they don't think about medicine. People who want to study medicine typically don't think about physics. They're actually almost not the same type of people that are. But there is significant blend between those that go one or the other way. Or they just don't hear that there is like this subdisciplines. So I think this is one of the challenges that we managed to overcome in Slovenia. In some other places, they're actually maybe have slightly different organization, which enables to then like having more effective systems. If you look at like the what is where like you ask for a different place around the world, interestingly, it's not say one location or like one region is. Clearly, just by the number of medical physicists, the resources, U.S. and North America and Europe, Australia are leading the field. But you have like these pockets of really very innovative research that's coming from, South America, from Asia, everywhere. So it's not one place that I would single out. It's just heterogeneity is the really the winning here.
You shared with me earlier before we started recording the podcast about your desire to create an international roundtable. Just give us a couple of sentences on that. What is your vision for an international roundtable?
I guess the vision for International Roundtable is pretty much along the same lines as we talked about. So bringing medical physics as a community together, not focusing as much as in everything else in differences, but in similarities. And again, the similarity is we have exactly the same patients everywhere in the world. We want to do the same thing. We want to treat the disease the best what we can. We want to outsmart the disease the best what we can with the means that we have, and let's work together. Now, the challenge of this is that, there are different barriers in different parts of the world. However, these barriers are often sometimes self-inflicted or exaggerated. And, it takes a little bit of creativity to bring this together. For example, and I think, you mentioned, COVID as example. One of the things that happened is that world became easier to connect. The video conferences are easier to do. They're never replace face-to-face. But, they enabled it's easier for people to meet. It's easier to people to understand each other. So, of course, the cultural differences, the sensitivity that we're facing, but it's nothing unique. So in some way, the vision for this roundtable is that we are starting to work together towards, I would call, the same as the large international collaborations and partnerships that were in other parts of physics, like hydrogen physics, CERN, for example, or astrophysics, astronomy, like to bring the same together in medical physics. So this is the ultimate goal. It'll take some time, but I'm very optimistic it will happen.
I am too, especially with you organizing it. You mentioned a minute or two ago about using artificial intelligence to create a patient profile for medication. And this was something I learned about when I came to Wisconsin, was the state of the art today and also what's possible. I think I didn't realize that for many, like let's say a radioactive medication, that the size of the dosage for many different kinds of people is actually the same. And that's something that can be changed for the betterment of the patient themselves. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So the way how this is something in a broader context of so-called personalized medicine or precision medicine, which aims to select the right treatment at the right dose for the right person. Now, all this is conditioned by understanding what this person needs, correct? And this is easier said than done. And we go back to the same problem that we have, that we would need to know how this, for example, radiopharma, this are called like radioactive labeled pharmaceuticals, or any pharmaceutical is distributed in the body, how it's affecting the cells, and how much is really, for example, treating cancer or any other disease, for which we need to then monitor, see what happened before, during treatment, after treatment, make models of that, and then based on that assessment, adjust the dose. And I think this is the key advances that we'll be able to see in in the future, and like really with AI help in a big way, is that we will be able to better capture the complexity of these interactions. At the moment, like the models are usually we rely on relatively simple models. They're like assuming linear relationships or limited interrelationships, but we know these are much more complex. We don't have all the data, so we cannot just expect things will happen or change overnight. A lot of medical research is actually hampered by very strict laws that protect human patient information, which are good. They had to protect, no questions asked. But they create a barrier like for data sharing, so it's very hard to build large data sets. There are ways to do like so-called federative learning and methodologies that you can capture different or take the same models and apply different sense and collect the data. But it's still, the data that currently exists is most of the time not optimized for AI. And again, it's not shareable. It's not easy to do. It's like in Google and other searches, they're built on large data. So I think this is part of its hammering. But the more is there's realized that the more will happen. Obviously, this doesn't come without investment. So we hope that the governments realize that there is, and they do realize, it's like no questions asked, that there is a need for reforms, regulatory reforms of how AI is put into the practice, responsible way, in safe way. But I think this is what we can expect in the next decade or two. And again, not forgetting that also everything we've done so far is actually no, AI is not always better. That's the bottom line. And like we've seen the same way, we do the traditional models, AI models, and it's not always given that AI would be winning.
So the reason that I have met you is because AAPM is interested in the American Association for Physicists in Medicine is interested in identifying the biggest breakthroughs in physics and medicine over the next 10 years. And we've talked already about AI, we've talked about therapy, we've talked about diagnostics. From your perspective, you're exposed to so much of this field. Where do you see the biggest breakthroughs coming down over the next few years here?
Of course, I'll just take my magic ball, and I'll tell you what it tells me. But it's kind of like cloudy today, so I cannot really tell you where the biggest breakthroughs to expect. But I do know that I think one of the major barriers that we had is that medical physics has been super successful in very few fields, in particularly in diagnostic imaging and radiotherapy, particularly for cancer, but much less in other fields of like cancer to some extent, much less in other fields of medicine. And like the quantitative science is equally important. So I think the breakthroughs in general that like specifically to medical physics won't come by being more and better engaged with other fields of medicine than traditionally. So expanding, and this goes into neurological disease like dementia, which we know it's like quickly becoming dominant, being more present in cardiovascular disease, and you can go down the list. But also, I think the maybe better spread of hardcore sciences, in particularly physics or physical science, engineering, they're even closer embedded with the medical science. I think that will require some of the reform in the way how like even medicine is taught, and not that it's not taught now, but I think the technologies are becoming so critically important that probably, I would envision in the future, it wouldn't be just, medical doctor, but it'll be also the technical doctor that comes and like advises, because it's impossible to do both things. Or some of this will be probably from both aspects replaced with like, some components of AI that enable decision making. So I think really going forward, I think the merge of the quantitative science with better measurements, more measurements, the right measurements at the right time, which we still have to figure out what, with better analytics, modeling, personalized, and then supported decision making. So in this case, clinical decision support in addition to humans, like what the human model, I think will be really the ones that will move the needle. And this is really essentially in a similar way as you can see that the computers have changed the needle the way how we are still humans, we still do, but now we can do certain other things that are enabled by fast calculation and fast data access and of course and everything that we have. I think the same thing will happen in medicine as well.
It's interesting. You talked about it, a medical doctor and a technical doctor. It made me think about, many years ago, when we thought of information technology, it was always subservient to strategy. But today, the chief information officer is at the same level as the chief strategy officer, right? Because technology offers so much value that it takes an expert in that space to describe what kind of value is potential. And so I thought of an analogous situation to going to a medical doctor to understand the technical aspect of physics.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, and I think it's just impossible, for any human in some way to comprehend or to do well both, and then you can take also psychology aspects which are done. So I think humans will always be there, but how to create these teams with a significant component of technology that's driving both decisions, but also the intricacies of what you can get out of the existing technologies or in a different way. I think that will change the way how we should rethink what's the optimal way how to implement, just in this case, medicine.
So with your cloudy crystal ball, just give us some examples of like cardiology or surgery. What is a role that medical physics could play in either of those? Just, as you look into the foggy future.
I think one of the easy ones is that which is happening, and I should say I'm not an expert, so I'm just hypothesizing. Is really that we make better models of cardiac, that we can plan treatments, and some of this is happening, where we'll do, and some of this image guided surgeries are there, but it's also that we can associate this image guided intervention, for example, with the long-term outcomes. So where we can go, this navigation is happening there. I think the convergence of the fields, for example, usually as we age, unfortunately, typically it's not a single disease. So comorbidities where they're happening, or one of the diseases also really important. So say, cardiac and cancer. So, and these disciplines are typically, even like medically are separated. So, and like this are very hard to merge. And I think it's much easier to do this merger between like on a system level for machines and models. And I think this is where again, I think medical physics will have the major impact in terms of, in addition, just like novel technologies that are happening right there. And I think, again, like technologies are not only the big ones. Now we have a lot of this variable technologies, and a lot of input that's already happening in this patterns, finding them, but really associating to this, for example, again, these are a lot of that, fields that are building really expertise in one area, but it's like gluing this together. I think this is really where medical physics is really excels. Because it understands like both where the signals come, understands what it means in a tissue, in a human, and like again, like, so I think this is like really the impact that I see in any of the disease. It's like looking at a human much more in a complex way and model it with the available data.
And then before we leave today, I just want to touch on the what's actually happening in a clinical setting today, because I think many people are not aware. When I was in Madison at the University of Wisconsin, we saw a healthcare system literally physically integrated with the university. And so there were tests that were coming from the hospital to the lab, and then the lab was then turning those, and the lab was not just processing tests for Wisconsin's health system, they were processing them for the entire nation. We saw all kinds of things coming in. Tell us, like, what is the state of clinical medical physics today?
Yeah. So I think this is what's important to know is how the advances in medicine happen. They happen through clinical research or clinical trials, where it means that we are trying something what we hope will have better outcomes. And of course, those things are hard to do because, for one, you have to be sure that this is like a better technology, is better treatment, whatever. But it's also hard to because, and it's really patients that need to understand the value of trying new things, because that is the only way how we can move. But of course, like typically every place is too small to actually do it alone. So that's why this research that happens or starts typically in a single lab, then goes in a single institution, has to become multi-institution, and then of course international at some point. And of course, sometimes it's not optimal that every lab would process things in their own way. So it's much more efficient for things to travel to the centralized labs, which requires certain standards. Now there's much easier for data to travel than patients to travel. So I think this centralization of centers of excellence or like more facilities, I think it's really critical for efficient, safe, and more also cost efficient clinical research. So I think this is what you've seen is essentially this forefront of the best research that we hope will lead to the next generation of breakthroughs and is doing. And of course, you have to try multiple things before you really find that real breakthrough. But it's happening all the time, and I think this is what is not seen. This is all behind the scene, and this is where again, like if we can like wrap up, the medical physics is a lot of this discipline behind the scenes that's not seen, not known, that's the one that's actually collecting, processing the data, organizing, making all this systems or innovating, creating different technologies that eventually are used there. That's essentially behind the scenes that we hope to also come. And at this point, I would really thank you for focusing one of the podcasts, your podcast on medical physics, on a little hidden gem of discipline that I think once you discover it, you just become amazed of it and you see how impactful it really is. So thank you for really enabling this. I really appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you for participating with us today. I know my listeners will enjoy learning from you. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Seth.